Hello and welcome to Fantasy View, a podcast about reviews for fantasy novels. I'm Jason Hubbard. I once had a coworker give me 2 fantasy novels that she found at a yard sale. One of them was Castle of Wizardry by David Eddings. Let me tell you, if you can think of a more generic title than that, I'll give you a cookie. The book itself was pretty remarkable in that it was over 30 years old, printed in 1984. That's almost as old as I am. The pages were yellow with age, but the book was in good condition and perfectly readable. It turned out to be the 4th installment in a series called the Belgariad. Kind of a weird name, but then so is the Odyssey. I never heard of it before, but it has been credited to some extent by famous authors Christopher Paolini and Jim Butcher. I haven't read the other installments, but I'm sure the Belgariad is essentially a coming-of-age story wrapped up in a fantasy epic. The main character, Belgarian, or Garion for short, is like Luke Skywalker in that he starts out as a farm boy with a great destiny waiting in store for him. But unlike Luke, he doesn't just learn how to harness the power of midichlorians. My humble apologies to all you Star Wars fans out there. I'm one myself, you know. Garion learns about the facts of life, like what it means to be a son, a friend, and also a leader. Castle of Wizardry has good characterization and a well-realized world. But there are a few moments that come across as awkward. And while those awkward moments don't take away from the good writing, they are the story moments that stick out in my mind the most whenever I think of this book. The book begins when Garion and several other heroes, some of whom are kings, are desperately trying to escape an enemy lair within a mountain which is crumbling all around them. The mountain's falling to pieces because our heroes just killed some super bad guy named Chewchick, and also nabbed something called the Orb of Aldor, which I assume is a pretty big deal. So essentially, the mountain's crumbling because of magic. Go figure. Once they escape the mountain, they still have to get out of enemy territory and rendezvous with their army. And from here on, adventure awaits! Actually, this book is pretty light on adventure. It mostly seems like the setup for the next installment. Of course, I can't compare this book to the other installments, but if a book is light on adventure, it is what it is. Garion is accompanied by his Aunt Pole and grandfather Belgarath, who are 2 standout characters. Not only are they powerful magicians, but it is said that they guided Garion through his humble beginnings and into the rollicking adventure he's in now. They're both no-nonsense type of people who aren't without compassion, but when their survival instincts kick in, they can seem a little brusque. There are also Garion's best friend, Durnick, who imparts helpful advice, and Silk, a rat-faced little man who's the rogue of the group. And of course, he's a prince. Because this is the kind of story that says a secondary character cannot be important unless they're royalty. But for this review, I won't say too much about these guys. But of course, the story would seem empty without them. A character of even greater import is Sanedra. I hope I'm saying it right, the spelling is kind of weird. She's a princess who is half human, half dryad, which is a kind of tree spirit. She's kind of like Tinkerbell in that she can either feel all of one emotion or another. There's rarely a mixture. She can be sweet when she wants something, but she can also be selfish and vindictive. Qualities that usually only men are accused of having. Oh! Let the controversy begin! Throughout our hero's journey to safety, I was impressed by the dialogue that gave me a good feel for the characters, and the action bits were okay. But let's jump ahead to the book's middle, when Garion and friends reached the island nation of Riva, which, get this, has been without a king for hundreds of years. The royal line had been lost, so it's been wardens who had been ruling the nation. An awfully romantic notion, but that's typical in so many fantasy epics. Guided by his Aunt Pole and Belgarath, Garion is told to take the Orb of Aldor and place it in the hilt of a sword that's prominently placed in the Great Hall of the Riven Palace. It's said that if anyone else tried to do this, they'd be blasted away to smithereens, but Garion does it handily. Belgarath then announces that the rightful king of Riva has finally come to take the throne, and it is none other than Garion. This sounds all well and good, but I have a problem with the scene. You see, Garion has no idea what he was actually doing and what was about to happen since no one told him. His Aunt Pole and Belgarath could have, but they didn't. They let it be a complete surprise to him. At first, he was just a young man who was along for the ride. Now, his entire world is upside down because he's a king all of a sudden. So let me ask you, what do you think Garion will do about this? You can pause if you'd like to give yourself time to think. I'll wait. Okay. Personally, I'd imagine Garion will go to his aunt and say something like, "Aunt Paul! Did you know this was going to happen? Why in the seven hells didn't you tell me? Would have given me time to cope with the idea of being king. Instead, I feel like I got caught with my pants down while taking a leak. I mean, what did you think I was going to do if you told me? Run away? Do you really think so little of me?" So, does that really happen? Well, yes and no. Mostly no. A confrontation certainly doesn't happen right away. The beginning of the next chapter simply says that Garion is unused to everyone bowing to him. Instead of him feeling any anger or resentment, the author simply says he feels numb to the revelation of him being king. Which means, of course, that he feels nothing at all. I'm sorry, but this doesn't seem realistic to me. Garion should be much more confrontational, and there should be a serious discussion between his Aunt Pole and Grandfather Belgarath. But here's the thing about Garion. He takes mind-blowing revelations extremely well. He's a go-with-the-flow kind of guy. But while I understand that, there are just some things that even a go-with-the-flow person wouldn't easily accept. When Garion finally says something to his aunt, it goes like this. "You both knew all along, didn't you?" Garion said. "Who I was, I mean." "Naturally," Aunt Pole answered in that maddening way of hers. "Well, if you wanted me to behave like a king, you should have told me about it," Garion said. "That way I'd have some time to get used to the idea." Okay, sounds sensible enough. It seems like the author has fixed this little plot hole. I just think this confrontation comes a little too late. It also seems a little contradictory. This is supposed to be a coming-of-age story in which the main character learns many things about dealing with people. Several times he learns that he should consider other people's feelings about certain matters before he acts upon them. And yet his aunt and grandfather certainly didn't consider his feelings when they guided him to reveal himself as the rightful king of Riva. Here's another example of Pole and Belgarath's insensitivity. After it's revealed that Garion and Sinedra will be married, another thing Garion will have to cope with, they instruct Garion to give Sinedra an amulet on a necklace as a gift. Sinedra naturally loves it, and Garion helps to put it on her. Pole and Belgarath then reveal that the amulet is enchanted, creating a magical link between Sinedra, Pole, and Belgarath that will never break. The necklace proves impossible to take off, so Sinedra runs out of the room upset. True, it's not as nasty as Eric Cartman telling Scott Tenorman that he just fed him his own parents. But it comes pretty close. Pole and Belgarath just trick Sinedra into accepting an enchanted item. So tell me, why should Garion consider other people's feelings in certain matters, while his aunt and grandfather don't have to give a shit about such trivialities like that? Is it because they're older and wiser in the ways of the world? I imagine that would be the author's reasoning, but that's a concept that would be difficult to accept by young people, the book's target demographic. I suppose some people might be comparing this situation to a similar one in the legend of King Arthur. Arthur had no idea he was destined to become king of the Britons when he pulled out the sword and the stone. Maybe someone should have told him, right? Well, the critical difference is that Arthur made a mistake in pulling out the sword. He was being groomed for knighthood at the time, and it's not unreasonable to believe that Merlin was planning to tell Arthur the truth about him before instructing him to pull out the sword. Instead, Arthur pulled out the sword ahead of time. Garion, on the other hand, made no mistake. He was instructed by his elders to put the orb in a sword, and then Belgarath announced him as king. This is very different from King Arthur's case, so really, Merlin is not quite like Aunt Pole and Belgarath. It turns out that the Orb of Aldor has a mind of its own, and it can speak directly to Garion. It also influences the behavior of people, so it's playing God, kind of like how the author is doing. It wouldn't be unreasonable to assume that the orb knows what's going on throughout the entire palace, having invisible eyes everywhere. So when Garion is attacked by a would-be assassin, You'd think the orb would be able to tell him who this person was. But the orb never does. It can speak to Garion and influence others, yet it can't tell who threw a dagger at the king. Whoopsie daisy. But that development is not as disappointing as what happens next. Garion is told by the orb to look at what's called the Emmeryn Codex, which is an extremely long scroll with the writings of a man who is going insane. The writings are actually prophecies that reveal what will happen in the future, only the descriptions are kind of vague. Garion reads that a child of light and child of dark will meet and determine the future of the world. Oh, prophecy. You are a bitter pill to swallow sometimes. You get this a lot in fantasy stories. Some prophecy foretells the future and influences events, sometimes becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I don't like it. Oh, sometimes I don't mind it, but I mostly don't like it. Prophecy is a plot device that is way too easy to use, and because of that, many fantasy authors succumb to the temptation to use it. Even J.K. Rowling couldn't resist. What I don't like about prophecy is that it's an easy source of motivation for the hero, plus the villain perhaps. And in my opinion, that cheapens the motivation. It can rob the hero of choice under the right circumstances, and the hero may resign himself to his fate, instead of simply being brave and bold. Many times, just the fact that there is a prophecy tells the hero that he will win out in the end. Therefore, his decision to meet his destiny head-on is easier to make. To see what I mean, just imagine you're reading or watching The Lord of the Rings. You're at the Council of Elrond, and Elrond suddenly says, "There is a prophecy among my people that a halfling shall take the One Ring to Mount Doom, because only he is capable. I believe Frodo is the chosen one foretold in this prophecy. Therefore, he has no choice but to become the ring-bearer. He must go out and save the world from the tyranny of Sauron. Now, don't give me those dirty looks. I have said my piece, and my word is law here. None of you can take the ring, only Frodo. Because of prophecy. It's that simple." The prophecy didn't mention this. Joking aside, what if that really did happen? I guess Frodo would still have a choice in the matter, but he would feel incredible pressure to become the chosen one, and so he would end up as the ring-bearer regardless of what he thinks. And do you think he would still be an endearing character if he could say to his fellows, "You heard Master Elrond. I'm the chosen one. You can't carry the ring, only I can. Me." Fortunately, that doesn't happen. Frodo volunteers to bear the ring because he sees that the ring is influencing the minds of those at the council. Kind of like a certain orb I mentioned. Frodo has proven to be resistant to the effects of the ring, so he feels he's the best candidate to be the ring-bearer. He knows there'll be danger, yet he still volunteers. And that's why Frodo Baggins is considered to be one of the best heroes in all of fantasy. I think a lot of authors share my opinion and see the follies that this plot device can bring about. So even if they do include a prophecy in their stories, the prophecy plays a minimal role, just like in George R.R. Martin's A Dance with Dragons. And Terry Goodkind has his heroes fight the edicts of prophecies, saying that they're just a bunch of lies. Which they are. But that's not the case in Castle of Wizardry. There's a very long prophecy in the story, and if it didn't exist, then Garion wouldn't leave his palace and fiancée behind to confront some big bad named Torak. To the book's credit, Garion does have a choice. He can either fight a very long, drawn-out war, or go toe-to-toe with Torak and prevent senseless deaths. Still, he believes the power of prophecy is on his side, and so it kind of cheapens his motivation. So Garion hits the road along with Belgarath and Silk. At some point along the way, Belgarath takes a trip down memory lane, and he's struck by a memory that he had buried for a long time. In being a sorcerer, he can transfigure himself into various animals, his favorite being a wolf. He remembers that long ago he had met a female wolf who was in heat. Garion and Silk assume right away that Belgarath had taken advantage, but Belgarath claims he did no such thing. Instead, he and the wolf became longtime partners, though they never mated as animals. But then the wolf went away for a time, until Belgarath met her again, only this time she was a human. and she became Garion's grandmother. Bestiality! I hear you shout to the heavens. Well, it's not that if both people are humans now, is it? Still, it's pretty awkward to hear that your grandmother was a freaking wolf. Belgarath then teaches Garion how to transfigure into a wolf himself. They then both turn into wolves and run for a bit, but a new wolf then appears by Garion's side, and he correctly assumes that she is his grandmother. Garion asks her if she ought to be dead by now, since Belgarath had known her hundreds of years ago. He's long lived, you see. She says she is, though, I quote, "It doesn't really feel all that different," unquote. I can only suppose that wolves in this world are like Jedis. They never really die, they just become ghosts made out of midi-chlorians. She claims that she never really saw Belgarath as a man, because there was something wolfish about him. Quote, "I always really thought that his being born in man shape had been a mistake of some kind. Maybe it was because of what he had to do. The shape doesn't really matter, though." Unquote. You could interpret this as saying that all life is one and the same, that souls can connect with one another regardless of what form they take. You could say it's a beautiful sentiment that can apply to real life and not just this fantasy world. But I like to explain all this to creatures like rabbits and chickens, especially after a wolf hunts them down and eats them and then goes off to mate with a human. The shapes don't really matter. They are souls just like you and me. But they are damn good eating. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Aunt Pole learns that Garion is gone, and she knows what he plans to do since she knows the prophecy. So, what does she do? Totally trip out, of course! She's a powerful sorceress, so she uses her magic powers to obliterate valuable vases, statues, and furniture in a fit of rage. People leave her be and make sure to avoid her, lest she uses her magic on them. Up to this point, Aunt Pole is said to be very wise and rational. But I ask you, after tripping out the way she does, how can anyone take her seriously ever again? If I said it once, I'll say it a few more times. Awkward. But hey, I don't want to be totally negative about this book. So what are some good things about it? Well, just ask yourself, do you like furries? If you do, then there's a chapter that's just for you. In the swamp, our heroes meet a sorceress who has made friends with beavers. I say this without the tiniest bit of irony. She wants Belgarath to use his unique magic to give the gift of speech to her beavers, because apparently beavers have a lot to say. It's a nice little scene that serves as a diversion from any melodrama going on. There's another cute scene where Sinedra tries to convince a blacksmith to make her some armor, and he thinks she's mad for doing so. There's also moments when Garion's friend Dernick tells him that he should be himself, and not try to be someone he's not. To accept yourself for what you truly are is the best thing one can do, lest there be any misunderstandings or whatnot. It's a good message for young people of all backgrounds. Unless you're a serial killer, in which case you can go fuck yourself. In spite of all my criticisms, this series might be a good start for readers 10 years old and up who are looking to get into fantasy novels. Garion's endeavor to learn the facts of life is timeless, so there's all kinds of good advice in here for young people. And it's totally possible to enjoy the series while forgiving its follies. But if you want an example of a coming-of-age story like this that's done right, check out the Codex Alera series by Jim Butcher, whom I know read the Belgariad because he mentioned the character Belgarath in one of his books. If you're interested in this series, I'll say it again, Castle of Wizardry is the 4th installment. The first is called Pawn of Prophecy. Oh, there's that word again. Maybe one day I'll read the final installment of the Belgariad, but that might be a long time in coming, since I'm more interested in other titles. Once I'm through with all the titles that are stored in my Kindle, we'll see. Till then, thanks for listening to Fantasy View, and please, keep reading.